Welcome, everyone, to the HeroX Innovation Leadership Speaker Series. I'm Jamie Elliott. I'm joined today by Jeremiah Garrick from the COSSA Institute. Jeremiah, thanks so much for being here. Tell us a bit about yourself and your innovation journey so far.
Yeah, happy to be here. Thanks, Jamie, for the invitation and for reaching out to me, be a part of the HeroX series. As far as kind of my background, as Jamie said, I'm Jeremiah Garrick. I'm manager of community engagement and strategy with the COSSA Institute. And so my background really focuses on energy and sustainability policy. My work, which we'll get into, focuses mostly on trying to bridge the gaps between energy developers, community priorities, and perspectives as well, and trying to make sure that people have a good understanding of what all sides of development looks like. There's a lot of different sides to every story and to every project that gets built. And so I think that getting everyone together and talking through those things is one thing that helps to kind of move forward with a lot of this and move forward in the energy transition. So my background, I started out studying business at CU Boulder and then ended up transitioning over to Penn State World Campus once the pandemic hit and everything kind of started going crazy. And at Penn State, I started studying energy and sustainability policy because I wanted to get into something that involved more environmental sciences and more of the, you know, trying to combat climate change side of things. But policy fit the business courses that I had a little bit better. And it was something that I was still interested in. So that's kind of how I got involved in policy and politics itself. And then as I was finishing up my degree at Penn State, I actually took an internship with COSSA, and then through COSSA helped set up the COSSA Institute, which is the 501(c)(3) that I work for now. And so I think, renewable energy is definitely a passion of mine. It's cheaper than it's ever been. It's more accessible than it's ever been. A lot of the development itself happens at a local level, and projects can succeed or be killed at a local level, kind of no matter what state or federal governments say, no matter where the headwinds are currently going. It all happens in the local community, and organization in support or to deny or try to kill a project all happens at the local level too. And so we started realizing that, and that was a lot of what I focused on throughout my education as well, is trying to understand what are the local politics in Colorado surrounding renewable energy? How do we go about, you know, impacting those local perspectives in a way that helps people feel more comfortable about development, but also helps people feel more comfortable about their own communities and feel like they have a say in the development that's happening in their own communities. And then also, helping to just make it clear that it's not all about climate change anymore. That still is a lot of people's focus, but this is affordability, it's reliability, it's making sure that we have the lights on in our communities, and it's making sure that people with life-saving medical equipment in their homes are able to keep that running, making sure that refrigerators and freezers keep running even if there's a power outage. And so it's become a lot more than just a debate of climate change. And I think that that's been interesting to see and interesting to figure out throughout the work that I've been doing.
Yeah, very cool. And it sounds like it's also about transparency and the ability to understand what's happening at those different levels. Can you tell me about COSSA and about the Institute and how you see them innovating differently?
Yeah, absolutely. So for anyone that doesn't know, I mean, COSSA is pretty Colorado specific, but COSSA is the Colorado Solar and Storage Association. We're a trade association, membership based. It's a 501(c)(6) organization, and we really focus on, supporting solar and energy storage companies in Colorado, making sure that there's a solid business for them, and making sure that there's not crazy legislation being passed that affects the whole industry in any negative manner. And trying to push forward legislation that affects the industry in a positive manner. So COSSA really focuses on the policy, the legislation, the lobbying, all of that kind of stuff. And then there's also, I guess I'll take a step back. So I joined the COSSA team about 3 years ago, and back then I was doing a little bit more of that policy research side of things, a little bit more of the lobbying, and we realized pretty quickly that projects started being proposed in rural areas in Colorado, and counties started putting moratoria or basically bans, like temporary bans on renewable energy projects in their communities. And we started trying to figure out like, okay, so it's not something that's happening at the state level. It's not something that's happening at the federal level. This is all popping up in local communities, usually after a project has been proposed. We'll see people who don't have regulations in place for these types of projects throw a moratorium up and not really know where to go from there or how to regulate some of these projects if they haven't seen them in their community before. And so that's what the COSSA Institute was born out of. And the COSSA Institute's a 501c3. It's a sister organization. We work super closely with COSSA, but technically have a different funding mechanism. We're not membership based, and we have a different board of directors as well, even though we still do work very closely with COSA, like I said, and we're still doing joint events and making sure we're heading the same direction, which is more solar and more energy storage in Colorado. But we just have kind of different approaches where COSA takes the state policy approach and makes sure that there's the business case, and then COSA Institute takes the local policy approach, make sure we're connecting people, make sure we're, getting factual information out there that's not just whatever people are reading on Facebook or Nextdoor or Twitter, I guess X, formerly Twitter. And so I think that like really the COSA Institute handles those local issues, the misinformation, the regulations that might get passed that are just don't make any sense or haven't been seen before because the community didn't really know what they were doing when they were writing them, and also the moratoria, trying to understand those, trying to understand bans on renewable energy and see where the community is coming from and try to basically open the door for developers. And so we do a lot of different projects and programs through COSA Institute, most of which I host personally and have been for a couple of years now. But a lot of that was born out of just seeing that need of like development all happens at the local level. And if you're not there and you're not meeting people where they are and talking with them about what their priorities are, about what their community is feeling, you're not going to have a very successful project, no matter what kind of development it is. And so COSA Institute tries to tackle that through, yeah, hosting events, spreading factual information, and making sure that there's no gaps between both understanding but also relationships between local communities, utilities, and I guess NGOs in addition to the solar and energy storage industry.
Right. It's really cool. It's because we hear about national programs, state programs, and then, regional or local programs. But often what affects us in our personal lives, when there's development going on around us, it it affects our daily life. It affects, for a period of time if there's development happening. And it's, I think it, like you said, it helps clear up some of that ambiguity around those things to understand they want to hear from me or they want to give me some information that's useful. My first introduction into things like this was a couple of years ago. We got to work with an Italian utility, A2A, and they were leading a challenge competition to crowdsource innovative business models for solar communities, for local solar communities. And what I think is interesting, I mean, the challenge was just a lot of fun, but what I think was interesting that connects to what you're describing is that by even running the challenge competition, you're putting out this information to the community. You're saying, we're going to share with you everything we know, and we're going to share with you everything we don't know, which is why we're running a challenge to learn from you as to how to optimize this thing. It's really, really cool.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I'm curious about any programs or projects that you've had going on that you can talk about and the impact that they've been having.
The main program that COSA Institute has been hosting for the last, I guess, 3 years since its inception, it was under COSA's belt as Land Use Renewable Energy Symposia. And then once we kind of transitioned it over to COSA Institute, we changed the scope and the name a little bit from focusing just on land use to being solar in your community events. And so these events, we get about 50 folks together. We usually do it at, a local community center or library or something that's accessible to the folks in the region. And then from that county, we'll invite, planning and zoning folks, we'll invite the county commissioners, we'll invite any conservation groups or energy groups that are active in the region, and then also bring in, development experts, people who can talk towards specific concerns of the community that we're hosting the event in, be it water experts or fire experts, or even just developers who can speak towards what construction itself looks like and what decommissioning looks like and how these things are regulated in other communities. And I think that that's been very successful. It gives people a format and a platform where they can just come and ask questions about what renewable energy development looks like. Like people don't in general, but when you're doing change at scale and they feel like it's someone coming outside of the community into their community to change things, people get very skeptical. And I think that's warranted. Like, I think people should be asking questions, and I think people should be skeptical about folks who are doing, any sort of development in their region. But this is us basically, these events are us extending an arm and saying, like, we want to be partners with the local community. We want to make sure that developers are talking with you guys early on before they have land positions and before they have their project all lined up so that you still have a chance to make some recommendations or feel heard through the process. And these events really allow that to happen. And so how we do these events, usually it'll be 50 to 70 folks, whoever I can really get in the room from that county and the surrounding areas that's applicable towards either making the decisions for these projects or informing the community about these projects. And yeah, just put them in front of subject matter experts who can give TED style talks, or we also do panels, and then we'll do whatever topics are most applicable. But we almost always focus on things like wildlife impacts and how those are taken into account throughout development and throughout operations. Decommissioning is always a big one because some communities have dealt with, especially oil and gas, but other forms of development that have left messes or just left projects behind and not dealt with them. So that's something that we hear a lot is, what are we doing there? Agrivoltaics is a very hot topic right now, which is mixing agriculture and solar. And so there's a lot of different definitions of agrivoltaics, but commonly, having sheep grazing under the panels is pretty common, or there's a couple different more innovative approaches in Colorado, like Jack's Solar Garden is a very cool one. And that's basically different research plots under a solar array where different organizations and even universities are doing like soil moisture retention studies, or, the taste of different crops from under panels versus outside of the panels. And it's super cool. Like, that kind of stuff is really interesting to learn about. But that's been a hot topic across Colorado because we have so much agricultural land that no matter what community you're in, people are wanting to talk about how do we mix these two things and how do we make sure that we're still keeping our productive agricultural land while allowing for renewable energy development at the same time. I think has been successful. And we've had 750 attendees to this event series so far, which for just me hosting them and bringing people in and setting up the programming, I think is pretty solid.
Yeah.
And I think this year alone, we had about 170 people attend those events and participate, which again, they're fairly small scale. It's like 50 folks in a room, but it's enough that we really can have those conversations and have everyone involved in the decisions in the room talking about what they need to be talking about. And so I think that's been very successful. Some other projects that we're working on, we do utility engagement workshops, which are kind of similar, but more of involving the utilities, cooperative and municipal utilities, not really the big IOUs, but like bringing in DER guys, the distributed energy resources guys, and the like smart programs guys from utilities, and talking to them about changing grid technologies and what's new with solar and batteries, and how do we do, virtual power plants effectively, and what role does solar and batteries have in that, or how do we do vehicle to X and make it
Yeah.
affordable, but also ensure that people's chargers aren't going out all the time, and so, or just how do we even communicate with customers? And so those are all topics that we kind of focus on those workshops, but that really gives us the relationships with those utilities and the right people at those utilities to then have an in with them, to connect with developers, to also connect with the local communities. And so it's kind of that triangle of like everyone's involved, and making sure that we have those solid relationships is very helpful to actually move the industry forward in Colorado. One of the other things we work on is after those events, especially the solar near community events, we'll follow up with communities especially ones that have moratoria, and try to work with them to update their land use regulations. That was something that we realized early on with all the moratoria popping up was, Colorado is home rule. And so we have 64 counties that all make their own decisions for their own development. We have 274 or 275, it depends on who you ask, municipalities in Colorado. And so there's a lot of different moving pieces, and there's a lot of different people making the decisions about these projects. And land use regulations are not consistent across the state. So if you want to build a project in Denver County, for example, versus Routt County or Pueblo County, you're going to have to go through an entirely different application process for your permit to even start construction. And I think that that's been something that we realized we had to start commenting on and being involved in those processes to make sure that development didn't get stopped before it could even have a chance to start.
Yeah. I think the connection is interesting, especially between public organizations and private organizations, or nonprofit or NGO and private organizations. We saw Edmonton, the city of Edmonton, ran several challenge competitions on HeroX, and one of them in particular was preventing catalytic converter theft. And so the city, I think it was the Police Foundation that sponsored the challenge or hosted the challenge because they saw this problem that existed in the community. So everyone was aware of this problem, but the sponsor ended up being a local insurance company and they put up the prize money because, it's to their benefit to solve this community problem as well and then the brilliant thing about it was that while there's this massive global community on our platform, the winning solutions and the majority of the solutions came from the community. So, it became this civic engagement thing where folks got involved in solving a problem that was very, very important to them as well because they were seeing it every day. So really, really cool. I'm curious with that connection piece. You seem to play the role of a connector, and I think that is a role that innovators often play because they're trying to solve problems. They may not have access to everything that they need. Do you have any advice for anyone trying to play that role of bringing people together, getting that engagement, getting buy-in, things like that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that, as far as the solving the community issue that you're kind of just talking about goes, that's something that we definitely saw was developers and consultants and EPCs and like all of these groups that do this kind of work are interested in solving these problems. And they are interested in moving, even communities who don't have development yet forward to open up the door for them theoretically in the future. And I think that that is a very key piece of this because they're interested in solving the issue, but they don't necessarily have the capacity or the argument for their bosses to be able to, operate in a area where they don't have a prospective project yet, or where they don't have a land position yet. And so that's something where like you don't see a lot of this kind of stuff and you don't see a lot of these solutions pop up until there's a project on the table, and that raises tensions and that causes issues if there's 300 angry people that show up to a board of county commissioners meeting. There's a lot of groups, there's a lot of organizations that are trying to move this stuff forward and that are trying to solve these problems, but the funding has to come from somewhere, and that's not going to come from developers if they don't necessarily have an interest in that specific county or that specific area yet. But those communities still need the benefits of resilience and having batteries and having clean air and all of that. And so I think that it's an interesting mix there of like there is the appetite to solve these things, but there's not necessarily the capacity from the folks who are doing this work. And so that's where like COSSA Institute could come in and be more of the connector, but also the facilitator of these things. And then developers, if they do have a prospective landowner who's interested but haven't moved forward yet, they might not want to stick their necks out in a community yet if they don't know how the community's feeling about this kind of work. And this gives us an opportunity to say like, look, we're here to educate you, talk with you guys, have these discussions, and we want to do it in a productive manner. And so we're not going to be talking about specific projects. We're not here to talk about what does, just to name a random project in Colorado off the top of my head, like what is Garnet Mesa? What are the goods and bads? How do we, you know, make it a better project? Like that's not what we're doing at these events. We're really there to
Okay.
just lay that baseline of here's what development looks like, here's what you need to know, and here's what the community should know as well, and create that two-way street of having the community come to us in addition to us being able to connect them with developers, utilities, all that kind of stuff as well. And I think that, being that connector is important. It takes a lot of organization and it takes a lot of trying to get people in the same room, which isn't, it's a lot easier said than done a lot of times. But I think that some of the main things that I've found is, don't be afraid to cold email people. That's one way that I've gotten a lot of people at my events. And sometimes people respond, sometimes they don't. But you send an email and you say, hey, we've got this great event lined up for your community specifically, and we'd love for you to be in the room. Some people are very open to that and want to be involved and want to have these conversations. And if they want to be there, they'll come. So usually I'll do, I'll invite folks who I know are going to come and know are going to be interested, but I'll also invite the people who may not be as clearly interested, or even sometimes people who, from an industry perspective, may be viewed as detractors, I guess. Because if you're going to have these conversations, you want to have them with the right people in the room who can answer the questions in an effective and factual manner. And that's the developers who are working on these projects. That's the people who are doing consultant work for developers or doing consultant work for land use regulations. Like those people know the ins and outs of these projects better than anyone else and can help guide on how to best kind of approach these decisions. So does that answer your question? I kind of trailed off there a little bit,
No, it
but
does. It does, and it connects back to something you said earlier in the conversation about meeting people where they are. And what I think it does, it's really impactful in this day and age with our digital tools that make communication more convenient. The one thing it gives us an out on is accountability. So you talked about combating misinformation and using these events to do that. So you all are, creating these events and you're bringing people together and you're sharing information in a TED Talk format or a panel format, and then opening up for questions and allowing people to interact in a digital format. If somebody left a comment on a video for these presentations, you're not obligated to respond. But by being in the room and having others around who have a vested interest in this topic as well, you are putting yourselves out there to say, okay, we're going to answer your questions because that's what this is about. I think that that's a really powerful thing to just say, yeah, we're going to do this because this is important to both sides, to all sides, I guess. It makes perfect sense. It's really good.
yeah, for sure. I think it's been successful. And I think that like we've seen other states, actually other trade associations, but also just other energy supporter groups in other states reach out and ask like, how do we replicate these types of events in our own region? Because we think that this is something that's very valuable and has
Yeah.
been beneficial in Colorado. And I think that one is more of an anecdotal story, but one thing that we've seen that showed how well this worked is we had one of these events in a county. This must have been 2 years ago at this point, and we had the event in the morning, and then in the afternoon there was a open house just for anyone from the public to come ask questions. There was a proposed project in this county at the time, and so they had to, you know, field some questions about specific projects and that kind of stuff. But the planning and zoning director was at our event in the morning, asked tons of questions, got lots of good information, and then he was actually the one that hosted the open house that evening and was able to answer all the questions that the constituents had and that the local, just the public, anyone who was worried about the project or lived near the project or had heard about it but didn't know what it was. The county itself was then able to facilitate that discussion and answer those questions. And that's really what we're trying to do here. Like, we're not here to grassroots organize to support specific projects or anything like that. But if we can educate from the top and make sure that people have a good understanding of development, even if they're not, diehard solar supporters by the end of our event, that's totally fine. And most people aren't going to be. Like, a lot of Colorado is still all energies focused, which is totally fine. And like we do need a good mix of energies to be able to meet our demand, and that demand is ever increasing with data centers and EVs and all that kind of stuff.
Sure.
But yeah, it's been successful, and I think that alone, being able to see someone learn from factual information and from the developers and from the consultants and the people who work on this every day and take that to their own community, to the public, and answer questions in an effective way really showed that this does have an impact further than just the events that we host. And I think that it's cool to see, you know.
Yeah. Indeed. It's very cool. Very impactful stuff, important work. If folks want to learn more or get involved, where should they go? And we'll be sure to post all the links in the description.
Yeah, absolutely. I think if folks want to learn more, you can go to COSSA.co, COSSA.co, or COSSAInstitute.org. Those two websites will have a lot of information about what both COSSA and COSSA Institute are working on. If you want to learn more about specific projects and specific, efforts that the Institute is doing right now, you can reach out to me. I'm also happy to share information on how to host events like this, or what we've learned along the way if folks are trying to recreate this in their own states or their own communities. I'm always happy to answer questions, and my email is just my name, Jeremiah.Garrick at COSSAInstitute.org. And in addition to that, I mean, I think just get involved in your county meetings, get involved in your city meetings, be aware of what kind of development's happening and be a part of making those decisions. Like, county commissioners listen to the public in their region. And if you are a supporter of projects like this, make it known. Like, they want to hear that, and they want to see that people are in general supportive of energy development. And I think that that can play a big role, even if it's just one person showing up to a meeting saying, "Hey, I live here and I want to see stuff like this in my own community." It's pretty impactful to some of the people who are making the decisions, because a lot of what they see is the neighbors of projects who come and say, "I don't really want to look at this." And it's like, it's understandable. And that gets into the whole private property rights versus home rule arguments and stuff. Yeah, get involved, talk to your local electeds, and be aware of what kind of developments happening in your community and happening around your community so that you can be informed about it. Um, yeah, if you want to know more about COSSA Institute, definitely reach out to me. And I think that, one other piece of advice that I'd have here is just, I covered this a little bit, but the argument doesn't need to be just climate change anymore. Like, solar and energy storage are the cheapest, the most effective, and the fastest energy generation that you can build out at scale. And so when you're doing it at scale in a field, you got batteries on there. You don't have to worry about what if the sun's not shining or what if the wind's not blowing if you're doing wind. And it's as effective and cheaper than a lot of other energy sources at this point. And so the argument really can be for affordability, for resilience, and for making sure that we're meeting our energy demand and keeping the lights on. And I think that that resonates with everyone, no matter politics, no matter background, anything like that.
Awesome. Great work. Jeremiah, thank you so much. I really appreciate your time and your insight. And it's been a lot of fun. And thanks so much.
Yeah, thank you, Jamie. I'm looking forward to watching some of the HeroX series.